She put the bouquet down before anyone understood what she was doing. Not dropped, placed. On the step beside her, carefully, the way you set down something that mattered in a place where it wouldn't be damaged. White flowers, simple, the kind her mother liked. 300 guests inside. 800 in $1,000 of the photographer mid-shot. None of that was why she stopped. She stopped because a hotel manager was asking a woman to leave. Not asking. The specific, professional version of telling that dressed itself as asking so it could maintain the fiction of courtesy. The woman was 60-something, sitting on the bottom step of the hotel entrance with a canvas bag and the specific, dignified stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible while still existing. She was being asked to take up even less. Elena watched Richard tell the woman to move. She watched the woman begin to stand, slowly, the way bodies stood when they'd been sleeping rough, when the knees didn't cooperate the way they once had. She watched the woman's face. Not her situation, not her canvas bag, not the gap between her and the 300 guests inside. Her face. The specific contained expression of someone absorbing a small humiliation with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom small humiliations had become ordinary. Elena had seen that expression before, not on a stranger, in a mirror, a long time ago before. She set the bouquet on the step. She walked toward the woman. Behind her, she heard her mother say something. One word, in Spanish, quiet. And she knew without turning that her mother understood exactly what she was doing and why. Stay with me. Subscribe if you're new. Because what happens when Elena sits down changes everything. Share this tonight. The woman looked up. Elena sat down beside her on the step, in her wedding dress. On the morning of her wedding. And then the woman said her name. She'd been awake since 4. Not from nerves. She'd expected nerves and had prepared for them. Had told herself that nerves on your wedding day were reasonable and manageable, and that she had managed harder things than nerves. She'd been awake since 4 because that was when her mother had knocked on the hotel room door with coffee and the specific, matter-of-fact love of a woman who had been managing hard things alongside her daughter for 32 years and had decided that the best thing she could offer on this particular morning was coffee and presents. Carmen had sat in the chair by the window. Elena had sat on the edge of the bed. They drunk coffee in the dark. Not talking, the specific comfortable silence of two people who had run out of things to say that needed saying and had arrived at the place where just being in the same room was the whole thing. At 5, Carmen had said, "You okay?" Elena had said, "Yes." Carmen had said, "You sure?" Elena had said, "I'm sure." Carmen had looked at her. "Good," she'd said. "Because I'm not." Elena had looked at her mother. "You're not okay?" she'd said. "I'm so happy I don't know what to do with it," Carmen had said. "That's its own kind of not okay." Elena had looked at her. At 58 years old, sitting in a hotel chair in the dark drinking coffee on the morning of her daughter's wedding, she'd thought about everything that had led to this room. The apartments they'd moved through when Elena was small, 4 and 6 years, specific pragmatic migration of a single mother following work and affordable rent. The years Elena had shared a room with her mother because the apartments didn't have enough rooms for both of them to have their own. The specific, unremarkable sacrifices that Carmen had made so consistently that Elena had only understood them as sacrifices in retrospect when she was old enough to understand what they'd cost. She'd thought about all of it. She'd said, "I got it from you." Carmen had looked at her. "The not knowing what to do with happy," Elena had said. Carmen had looked at her coffee. "Yes," she'd said, "I suppose you did." The bouquet had been Elena's choice. Not the florist's. She told the florist what she wanted, and the florist had suggested alternatives, and she'd listened politely and said the same thing she'd said at the beginning. White flowers. Simple, not elaborate. The florist had said, for an event of this scale, Elena had said, white flowers. Simple. She'd gotten white flowers. Simple. Marcus had asked her about it once, not to change her mind, out of genuine curiosity. He did that. He asked about the choices she made with the specific interest attention of someone who understood that the choices people made said something about who they were and wanted to understand who she was. It was one of the things she loved about him. Why white? He'd said. My mother, she'd said. She used to stop in front of flower shops when I was small. We didn't have money to buy flowers. Flowers were not a practical purchase when you were managing on her salary. But she'd stop and look at the white ones specifically. And she'd say, those are the ones that don't need to be anything other than what they are. Marcus had looked at her. That sounds like her, he'd said. Yes, Elena had said. It does. She'd carried that into the choice. Flowers that didn't need to be anything other than what they were. She'd thought about her father briefly. She tried not to think about him on days that mattered, not from bitterness, from a long time ago decision, that the days that mattered belonged to the people who had stayed. Her father hadn't stayed. He'd left when she was 3 and had been a periodic, unreliable presence until she was 12, and then not a presence at all. She didn't hate him. She'd stopped hating him at 24, when she'd understood that hating him was a thing she was doing for him, giving him energy, keeping him relevant, maintaining the specific, corrosive connection of someone who mattered enough to hate. She'd stopped. She didn't invite him to the wedding. She didn't think about him on days that mattered. She thought about Carmen, about 4 apartments in 6 years, about white flowers that didn't need to be anything other than what they were. The photographs had started at 8:30. Not the formal ones. Those were for after the ceremony. These were the getting ready photographs, the specific, staged to look unstaged documentation of a morning that cost as much to photograph as some people's entire weddings. Elena had been patient with it, not because she loved being photographed. She didn't, particularly, because she understood that the photographs were for Carmen, for the future, for the specific accumulated evidence of a morning that deserved to be remembered. She'd smiled when asked. She'd held the bouquet where the photographer directed. She'd stood at the window for the light. She'd been doing all of it with the specific cooperative grace of someone who understood the assignment and was executing it. Then they'd moved outside. The front steps of the Grand Meridian. The photographer had wanted the facade, the marble columns, the specific, expensive grandeur of a hotel that cost what it cost because it looked like it cost what it cost. Elena had walked out. She'd stood where the photographer placed her. She'd held the bouquet. She'd looked at where the photographer directed. And then she'd seen Richard speaking to the woman on the step. She'd known immediately that it was wrong. Not wrong like illegal, wrong like the specific, recognizable wrongness of a situation that didn't require explanation to understand. The woman was sitting. She wasn't bothering anyone. She had a canvas bag and the specific, carefully arranged dignity of someone who had been maintaining dignity in difficult circumstances for long enough that it had become a practice. Richard was not speaking to her as though she had dignity. He was speaking to her as though she were a problem to be solved before the photographs were taken. Elena had watched him. She'd watched the woman begin to stand. She'd watched the woman's face, the expression. She'd seen that expression before. Not on Dorothy. She hadn't known it was Dorothy yet. On herself. In a mirror in a school bathroom when she was 9 years old, and a girl whose name she no longer remembered had said something about Elena's shoes. The specific shoes that had been the wrong kind, the affordable kind, the kind that announced what her mother's salary was. And Elena had stood in front of the mirror afterward practicing the expression that said, "This didn't touch me." She'd gotten good at that expression. She recognized it instantly on someone else's face. She'd set the bouquet on the step. She hadn't thought about Marcus, or the guests, or the photographer, or the $800,000, or what people would say. She'd thought about a girl in a school bathroom, and she'd walked toward the woman. She'd found the step at 2 in the morning, not chosen it, arrived at it. The specific, pragmatic navigation of someone who understood that shelter wasn't a preference but a calculation. And the calculation on this particular Tuesday night in November had come down to the Maheen of the Grand Meridian, which was large enough to stay dry under, and set back enough from the sidewalk that the security guard who came by at midnight had looked at her and kept walking. She'd taken that as permission. Not permission exactly. The absence of removal. Which was what permission looked like now. She'd had an apartment on Peachtree for 22 years. Not a grand apartment. A one-bedroom on the fourth floor, with windows that faced the street, and a radiator that made a sound in winter that she'd learned to sleep through, and a kitchen where she'd made the same tea every morning for 2 decades. She'd known her neighbors. Mrs. Patterson in 4B, who kept a garden on her balcony and gave Dorothy tomatoes in August. The young man in 4D, whose name she'd never learned but whose schedule she knew. Out at 7:15, back at 6:30, Chinese food on Fridays from the place on the corner. She'd known the building the way you knew places you'd lived in long enough for them to become part of how you understood yourself. She'd lost it 18 months ago. Not dramatically. The specific, grinding accumulation of things that had each seemed manageable until they weren't. The music program at Jefferson Elementary, where she'd taught for 19 years, had been defunded in a budget cycle that no committee had published adequately, and that she'd found out about in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday in February. She'd read the letter 3 times. She'd sat at the kitchen table for an hour. She'd started calling other schools. The calls had produced interviews. The interviews had produced nothing. Not because she wasn't qualified. 35 years of teaching piano, 19 at Jefferson. A wall of student recital programs she'd kept because the students had mattered, and the keeping was a way of saying they'd mattered. Because music programs everywhere were being defunded. Because the budget cycles didn't account for what music did for children that couldn't be measured on a standardized test. Because the thing she'd spent her life doing had stopped being something the system was willing to pay for. She'd exhausted her savings in 8 months. She'd lost the apartment at 10. She'd been navigating since. She was not without resources. This was important to her, not to anyone else. She understood that from the outside, the distinction between homeless and resourceless was invisible, that people looking at her on a hotel step saw the same thing regardless of what she carried internally. But internally, the distinction mattered. She had her phone, a prepaid one, charged at the library, her lifeline to the shelter system, and the social services appointments and the job applications she filed weekly with the specific, disciplined optimism of someone who understood that stopping was not an option she could afford. She had her canvas bag. Inside it, organized with the careful attention of someone for whom organization was a form of control when control was otherwise scarce. A change of clothes, her documents in a waterproof sleeve, a paperback she'd read 4 times, and a small photograph she kept in the front pocket. The photograph was of her piano studio. Not the piano itself, the studio. The corner of Jefferson Elementary where she'd taught for 19 years. The small chairs arranged in a semicircle. The music stand with the adjustable height she'd bought herself because the school's was broken and hadn't been repaired in 3 years. The light coming through the window at 3 in the afternoon the way it came through. At 3 in the afternoon, in autumn when the days were shortening and the light was doing something specific with the angle that made everything look briefly beautiful. She'd taken the photograph on her last day. She didn't know why she'd taken it. She knew why she'd kept it. She'd heard the wedding preparations begin at 7. Not seen, heard. The specific, organized noise of an event of this scale assembling itself. The florists, the caterers, the specific, urgent energy of people for whom this morning was a professional responsibility and who were executing that responsibility with the focused efficiency of people who did this regularly. She'd sat with her back against the column. She'd watched. Not intrusively, the specific, careful watchfulness of someone who had learned that invisibility was its own skill and that maintaining it required calibration. She'd been calibrating when the bridal party had come outside. She'd watched them arrange themselves for the photographs. She'd watched the photographer direct. She'd watched the bride. The bride was beautiful. Dorothy noted that without sentiment. It was simply true. A fact like the weather, the specific combination of the dress and the morning light, and the way the woman held herself, the particular ease of someone who was completely certain about something. Dorothy had looked at the woman's face, and something had moved in her chest. Not recognition. Something before recognition. A quality in the face. Something familiar in the way the woman held her jaw, the way her eyes moved, the specific, alert attention she brought to everything she looked at. Dorothy hadn't placed it. She'd been trying to place it when Richard had appeared. Richard had not been unkind in the way that people were deliberately unkind. He'd been unkind in the way that systems were unkind. Efficiently, without malice, with the specific, professional neutrality of someone who had a job to do and was doing it and had not fully considered what the job looked like from the other side of it. "Ma'am," he'd said, "I'm going to need you to move along. We have a private event and we need the entrance clear." Dorothy had looked at him. She'd seen this look before. The look of someone who had decided she was a problem before they'd finished the sentence. "I'll move when I'm ready," she'd said. "I need you to move now," he'd said. "This is a private property, and—" "I'm on the public sidewalk," she'd said. She wasn't, quite. The step was technically the hotel's, but she'd learned that stating things with confidence sometimes created a moment of uncertainty in the person receiving the statement, and that uncertainty was occasionally useful. Richard had looked at the step. He'd looked at her. He'd opened his mouth. Richard. A voice from behind him. He'd turned. The bride was standing 3 feet away, without her bouquet. Dorothy had looked at the step beside her. The bouquet was there. White flowers, simple, placed carefully on the step, in the one spot where it wouldn't be stepped on. Dorothy had looked at the bride. At the woman who had set down the most flowers of her life to come and stand between Dorothy and a hotel manager. At the specific, alert attention of someone who was completely certain about something. Dorothy had seen that certainty before. In a 7-year-old girl who had decided she was going to learn Fur-Elise, whether it took her 2 weeks or 2 months. It had taken her 6 weeks. She'd learned it. "Elena?" Dorothy said. The word came out before she'd decided to say it. The bride went completely still. Elena had not expected to hear her name. Not like that. Not in that voice. She'd been standing 3 feet from Richard, with the specific focused attention of someone who had decided something and was executing the decision and hadn't gotten to the part yet where she figured out what came after the deciding. She'd said Richard because Richard was on his name tag, and she'd learned a long time ago that using someone's name in a moment like this changed the texture of it, made it personal in a way that made certain things harder to continue. She'd been about to say something else. She didn't know what yet. She'd been going to figure it out when she got there. And then the woman had said her name. Elena. Not Ms. Vasquez. Not hey or excuse me, or the various forms of address that strangers used. Elena. The specific 2-syllable way that someone said your name when they'd known you before you were whoever you were now. She'd gone completely still. The photographer had gone completely still. The bridesmaids had gone completely still. Richard had turned around. The entire front steps of the Grand Meridian had briefly stopped being a $800,000 wedding and become something else. She'd looked at the woman. Really looked. Not the way she'd looked before, the way you looked at a person when you were assessing a situation. The other way. The way you looked when you were trying to find something. She looked at the woman's eyes, dark brown. The specific, alert darkness of eyes that missed very little. She looked at the woman's hands. Still on her knees, where she'd been about to push herself up. Long fingers, the specific, particular shape of hands that had spent decades doing something precise. She looked at the woman's face, at the structure of it, at the jaw, at the way the eyes sat, at something she couldn't name exactly. A quality, a presence, the specific combination of features that her memory was reaching for, and not quite finding, because the features had changed. The context was completely different. And she hadn't seen this face in 25 years, and the last time she'd seen it, she'd been 7 years old. She'd been 7 years old. The woman had been 32. "Miss Williams?" she said. The woman's face did something. Not smiling, the thing that happened before smiling, when the face registered that it had been correctly identified and was processing what that meant. "You remember," Dorothy said. "I remember," Elena said. She sat down on the step. in her wedding dress. Richard made a sound. She looked at him. "Give us a few minutes," she said. It was not a request. Richard looked at her. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at the photographer, at the bridesmaids, at the specific unprecedented situation of a bride in a $12,000 dress sitting on a hotel step beside a homeless woman 20 minutes before her wedding. He made a calculation. The calculation produced, "This is above my pay grade." He took 3 steps back. He took out his phone. He called someone. Dorothy was looking at her, not with the expression she'd had when Richard was there. Not the practiced containment, not the careful smallness. With something else. The specific, unguarded attention of someone who had been seen unexpectedly. "You're getting married," Dorothy said. "In about 20 minutes, Elena said. "Here," Dorothy said. She meant, in this hotel, at this wedding, in this dress, to whoever was waiting inside. "Here," Elena confirmed. Dorothy looked at the dress, at the bouquet on the step beside them, at the photographer who had lowered his camera but not put it away. "You were 7, Dorothy said. "I was 7, Elena said. "You couldn't reach the pedals," Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. "You had a step," Elena said, "a wooden step. You brought it every lesson." "I still have it," Dorothy said. She said it the way people said things they hadn't known they were going to say until they said them. Elena looked at her, at the canvas bag, at the step of the hotel. She understood, in the way you understood things that arrived all at once rather than gradually, exactly what was happening. Dorothy was living on the street. Dorothy, who had taught piano to children in this city for 35 years. Dorothy, who had brought a wooden step to every lesson so the small ones could reach the pedals. Dorothy, who had a canvas bag and a prepaid phone and a photograph of a room that wasn't hers anymore. Elena sat with that for a moment. She didn't look away, she said. Dorothy told her. "Not all of it. The shape of it. Jefferson Elementary, the letter, the 8 months of calls, the apartment, 18 months of navigating." She told it plainly. Not for sympathy, because Elena had asked directly, and Dorothy had long since decided that people who asked directly deserved direct answers. Elena listened. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry," or "that must be so hard." The specific reflexive responses that were true, but that deflected from the thing being said rather than receiving it. She listened. When Dorothy finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. "The music program," she said. "At Jefferson." "Yes," Dorothy said. "I read about those cuts," Elena said, 2 years ago. "I didn't." She stopped. "I read about them and I moved on because it wasn't my neighborhood and I didn't have a connection to the school and I had other things going on." Dorothy looked at her. "Most people do," Dorothy said. "I know," Elena said. I'm not making it better." "No," Dorothy said. "You're not." They looked at each other. The specific, honest discomfort of two people sitting with something that couldn't be made better by saying the right thing. "What's his name?" Dorothy said. "Who?" Elena said. "The man you're marrying," Dorothy said. "In 20 minutes. "Marcus," Elena said. "Is he good?" Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. At 67 years old, sitting on a hotel step asking the most direct question anyone had asked her all morning. "Yes," Elena said. "He's very good." "The good," Dorothy said. "That's the thing that matters." "I know," Elena said. The rest, Dorothy gestured at the hotel, the dress, the implied $800,000. "The rest is just the rest." "Yes," Elena said. "My mother would say the same thing." "Your mother," Dorothy said. "Carmen. She brought you every week. She waited in the car. She couldn't afford the gas to go home and come back," Elena said. "So she waited." Dorothy looked at her. "I didn't know that," she said. "She didn't tell people," Elena said. "She was good at not telling people things that would make them feel like they needed to do something about it." Dorothy was quiet. "She sounds," she said, "like someone who understood something about dignity." "Yes," Elena said, "she does." She looked at the bouquet on the step beside her, at the white flowers that didn't need to be anything other than what they were. She thought about 7 years old and a wooden step, and a woman who had brought it to every lesson without being asked because the small ones needed to reach the pedals, and needing to reach something wasn't a problem to be solved. It was just a thing you accommodated. She thought about what it meant that this woman, was sitting on a hotel step in November with a canvas bag. She thought about what she wanted to do about that, not what was practical, what she wanted. Carmen appeared at the top of the steps, not rushing, walking with the specific, deliberate pace of someone who had decided something and was implementing it without drama. She came down the steps. She stood beside Elena. She looked at Dorothy. Miss Williams, she said. Dorothy looked up at her. Something moved across Dorothy's face. Carmen, she said. Carmen sat down on the other side of Dorothy, in her mother of the bride dress, on a hotel step, beside her daughter. I waited in the car, Carmen said, every week for a year. I never came in. I know, Dorothy said. I wanted to. I wanted to watch. But I thought, she paused. I thought she needed the hour to be just hers, without me watching. She was talented, Dorothy said. I know, Carmen said. She worked, Dorothy said. That's rarer. Talented is easy. The work is what makes it. Carmen looked at Elena. Elena looked at her mother. At 58 years old, sitting on a hotel step in her mother of the bride dress because her daughter had sat down first. She thought, this is who we are. Not the $800,000 wedding. Not the 300 guests. Not the marble columns and the Grand Meridian and Marcus's $2.4 billion company. This, three women on a step, in a specific, unremarkable moment that cost nothing and meant everything. If this kind of story stays with you, subscribe. We tell stories about the moments that cost nothing and mean everything. Share this tonight. He'd been told at 9:47, not by Elena, by his best man, David, who had gotten it from one of the bridesmaids, who had gotten it from the photographer, who had been standing 15 feet away with a camera and a front row view of everything that had happened on the front steps of the Grand Meridian in the past 12 minutes. David had come into the groom's suite with the specific, carefully neutral expression of someone carrying information they weren't sure how to deliver. Marcus had looked at him. What? He said. Elena is outside, David said. I know, Marcus said. She's doing the photographs. She's sitting on the front steps, David said. Okay, Marcus said. With a woman, David said. Okay, Marcus said. The woman was being asked to leave by hotel management, David said. And Elena put down her bouquet and sat down beside her. Marcus looked at him. Her mother is out there too now, David said, also sitting on the steps. Marcus looked at the window. At the front of the hotel, he couldn't see from this angle. Is she okay? He said. Elena? David said. He paused. She looks like herself. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. David looked at him. That's it? David said. That's it, Marcus said. He'd known Elena for 4 years. Not casually, the specific accumulated knowledge of someone who had paid attention to another person for 4 years, because paying attention to her was one of the most interesting things he'd ever done. He'd known in the first month that she was someone who didn't make performative gestures. She wasn't ungenerous. She was extraordinarily generous, but in the specific, private way of someone who gave because giving made sense, rather than because being seen giving made sense. She brought food to colleagues who were working late without announcing she was doing it. She remembered things, not important things, specific things, the kind of things that mattered to the person they mattered to. The name of a coworker's dog, the date of a friend's immigration anniversary, the thing someone had mentioned once in passing and that Elena had filed and retrieved 6 months later at exactly the moment it was useful. She'd done it for him. 3 months into their relationship, she'd remembered that he'd mentioned once that his grandmother had made a specific kind of rice pudding and that he'd been trying to find a version that tasted like hers for 20 years. She'd found a recipe. She'd made it. She'd put it on the kitchen counter when he came home without saying anything. He'd tasted it. He'd looked at her. How? He'd said. You told me about your grandmother, she'd said. 3 months ago. I kept thinking about it. He'd looked at her, at a woman who had heard something he'd said in passing and had kept thinking about it and had done something about it. He'd understood in that moment that this was who she was, not in the big moments, in the specific, quiet practice of paying attention and doing something with what she found. He thought about that now. In the groom's suite with David, waiting for a reaction that wasn't coming. He thought about Elena on a hotel step in her wedding dress. He thought about what that meant, not about the optics. He'd stopped thinking about optics as a primary consideration somewhere around year 2 of building his company. When he'd understood that the decisions you made because they looked right and the decisions you made because they were right were different decisions and that you had to choose which kind of person you were going to be. He'd chosen. He'd been choosing ever since. He thought about what Elena choosing to sit down meant. He thought about who she was choosing to sit down beside. And he thought about what he wanted to do about it. David, he said. Yeah, David said. Find out what the situation is with the woman, Marcus said. The one on the steps. David looked at him. What do you mean, the situation? He said. I mean, Marcus stopped. She was sitting on the hotel steps. She has a bag. She was being asked to leave. He looked at David. Find out what's going on. How? David said. Ask someone, Marcus said. Ask Elena. Ask the hotel. Ask whoever. Marcus, we have 20 minutes before the ceremony, Marcus said. That's enough time to find out something. David looked at him. The specific look of a best man who had known the groom for 15 years and was processing the fact that the groom's primary concern, 20 minutes before his wedding, was not the ceremony. Okay, David said. He went out. He came back in 11 minutes. Not with full information, with enough. The woman's name was Dorothy Williams, former music teacher. 19 years at Jefferson Elementary before the program was defunded. Homeless for 18 months. Marcus listened. He asked one question. Apparently, David said, she was Elena's piano teacher when Elena was a kid. Marcus was quiet. He thought about Elena at 7 years old. About an apartment in a part of the city he'd never been to. About a mother who had waited in a car because she couldn't afford the gas to go home and come back. About a piano teacher who had brought a wooden step to every lesson so the small ones could reach the pedals. He'd never heard this story. Elena hadn't told him. Not because she was hiding it, because it hadn't come up in the specific way that stories came up, and because Elena didn't offer pieces of her past as conversational currency. She offered them when they were relevant. He was understanding now that they were relevant. David, he said. Yeah, David said. I need you to do something, Marcus said. David waited. Talk to the hotel manager, Marcus said. Richard. I want Dorothy Williams to have a room here tonight, if she'll take it. David looked at him. Just tonight? Marcus said. We can figure out the rest later, but tonight she shouldn't be on those steps. Marcus, and find out what she needs, Marcus said. Not what we think she needs. Ask her. Ask Elena. Elena will know. He paused. And David, yeah, David said. Don't make it a thing, Marcus said. Don't announce it. Don't make it feel like charity. Just handle it quietly. David looked at him. The 15-year look. The look of someone who had known you long enough to have seen you become who you were and recognized you in it. Okay, David said. He went out again. Marcus went to the window. He still couldn't see the front steps from this angle. He thought about Elena out there, in her wedding dress, on a hotel step, with the woman who had brought a wooden step to every lesson so the small ones could reach the pedals. He thought about what it meant to love someone, not the feeling, the practice. The specific, daily practice of paying attention to who a person was and acting in accordance with what you found. Elena paid attention. She'd been paying attention since she was 7 years old. She'd been paying attention to Dorothy Williams when Richard was asking her to move. He paid attention to Elena, and what he found, consistently, was someone who did the thing that needed doing without waiting for it to be convenient. He was going to marry that person in 20 minutes. He thought there was probably nothing luckier he could say about himself. David came back at 10:03. Rooms arranged, he said. Richard wasn't thrilled. Richard works for the hotel, Marcus said. The hotel works for us this weekend. Fair, David said. Also, he paused. What? Marcus said. The photographer, David said. He kept shooting, while Elena was on the steps. Marcus looked at him. He said he wasn't going to stop, David said. He said it was the most important thing that had happened all morning. Marcus thought about that. about a photographer who had understood what he was looking at. Good, Marcus said. There's one more thing, David said. What? Marcus said. Elena's not going to come inside until she's ready, David said. I asked one of the bridesmaids to let her know about the room. She said, and I'm quoting, she said, "Tell Marcus I'll be there. I just need a few more minutes." Marcus looked at the window. "Tell her," he said, "to take whatever she needs." David nodded. He went to the door. "David," Marcus said. "Yeah," David said. "The wooden step," Marcus said. "Dorothy's step, the one she brought to every lesson." "What about it?" David said. "Find out if she still has it," Marcus said. "If she does, make sure it comes with her." David looked at him. "Okay," he said. He left. Marcus stood at the window. He thought about Elena, about who she was when nobody was watching, about the specific private practice of paying attention, about the fact that she'd been doing it her whole life without knowing he'd someday be paying attention to her doing it. He looked at the window. He was ready. He'd been ready since the rice pudding. Dorothy had not expected any of this. Not the bride sitting down, not the mother following, not the specific suspended quality of a November morning that had stopped being a morning about other people and had become something she didn't have a word for yet. She'd been on hotel steps before. Not this hotel, other ones, the specific rotation of covered spaces that made up the geography of her days. She'd learned which ones had security that moved you along and which ones had security that looked away. She'd learned the difference between being tolerated and being permitted, which was smaller than most people thought from the outside. She'd learned to take up the minimum space required to exist. She'd been doing that. And then a woman in a wedding dress had sat down beside her. And then a woman in a mother of the bride dress had sat down on the other side. And now she was sitting between them, on the steps of the Grand Meridian, on the morning of someone else's wedding. Being the most seen she'd been in 18 months, she thought about what it meant to be seen. Not in the abstract, specifically. Being seen meant someone was looking at you rather than at the space you occupied. Being seen meant someone was hearing what you said rather than waiting for you to finish saying it. Being seen meant someone sat down beside you on a hotel step in a wedding dress because the alternative, walking past, continuing the photographs, doing the thing that the day required, was something they couldn't do. She'd been seen 3 ways in the past 20 minutes. Elena had seen her, Carmen had seen her, and the photographer, she'd noticed him, the specific quiet presence of someone doing his job from a respectful distance. The photographer was still shooting, not intrusively, carefully. The way you documented something you understood was important. She'd been invisible for 18 months. She didn't know what to do with visible. She was figuring it out. "Tell me about her," Carmen said. She'd been quiet since she sat down. Not awkwardly, the specific patient quiet of someone who understood that her arrival had changed the configuration and was giving it time to settle. "Tell me about Elena," she said, when she was 7. Dorothy looked at her, at the woman who had waited in a car every week for a year. "She was serious," Dorothy said. "She was always serious," Carmen said. "About the music specifically," Dorothy said. "Some children are serious about everything. That's a temperament. She was serious about music in a particular way, like she understood it mattered without being able to say why. She used to hum," Carmen said, "at home after lessons. She didn't know she was doing it." Dorothy looked at Elena. Elena was looking at her hands. "For Elise," Dorothy said. "Yes," Carmen said. "It took her 6 weeks," Dorothy said. "Most children at that level in 6 weeks, it's too much." I almost told her to wait. Move to something simpler. "Why didn't you?" Carmen said. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Because she didn't want simpler," she said. "She wanted that peace." She decided. And I've learned, in 35 years, that when a child has decided something, the teacher's job is to find a way to help them get there, not to redirect them somewhere easier. Carmen looked at her daughter. Elena was still looking at her hands. "She played it for me the day she got it," Carmen said. "I didn't know it was coming. She just sat down at the keyboard at home, the small one we had, and played it all the way through." "What did you do?" Dorothy said. "I cried," Carmen said. in the kitchen so she wouldn't see. Why so she wouldn't see? Dorothy said. Because she'd worked so hard for it, Carmen said. I didn't want her to think it was about me. Dorothy looked at her. At a woman who had cried in the kitchen so her daughter's achievement could be completely her daughter's. It was about both of you, Dorothy said. I know that now, Carmen said. She knew it then, Dorothy said. Carmen looked at her. How do you know? She said. Because she asked me once. Dorothy said, whether her mother would like the piece. Not whether I liked it, whether her mother would. Carmen was very still. I told her yes, Dorothy said. I told her it was the kind of piece that made people cry even when they were happy. She seemed satisfied with that. Carmen looked at Elena. Elena was looking at them now. She'd been listening. You knew, Carmen said to her. I knew, Elena said. You learned it for me, Carmen said. Elena looked at her. I learned it because I wanted to, she said. You were just the reason wanting felt like enough. Carmen looked at her daughter, in her wedding dress, on a hotel step, being exactly who she'd always been. Richard appeared at the top of the steps. Not to ask Dorothy to move. His posture had changed. The specific, recalibrated posture of someone who had received information that had changed their understanding of the situation. He looked at Elena. Mrs. Vasquez, he said, I've been asked to let you know there's a room available, if Ms. Williams would like it. Elena looked at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Richard. Then at Elena. Who arranged that? Dorothy said. Marcus, Elena said. She said it simply, not with the pride of someone presenting evidence of their partner's character, as a fact. The way you stated facts about people you knew completely. Dorothy looked at the hotel door. At the inside of a building she'd been told to leave 40 minutes ago. I don't want charity, she said. I know, Elena said. I have. I know, Elena said again. I know you have resources and you're managing and you don't want anyone to. She stopped. Mrs. Williams. Dorothy looked at her. It's one night, Elena said. And tomorrow we'll figure out what comes after one night. But tonight you shouldn't be on these steps. Dorothy looked at the step, at the hotel, at Elena, at Carmen, at the photographer who was still there, still shooting, with the specific patient presence of someone documenting something that had earned documentation. She thought about 18 months, about calibrating, about taking up minimum space. She thought about the studio photograph in her bag, about the light at 3 in the afternoon, about what it meant to be somewhere you'd been for long enough that it had become part of how you understood yourself. She thought about a wooden step that a small girl had stood on every week for a year so she could reach the pedals. She thought about what it meant to need something in order to reach something, and to have someone provide it, without making it a thing. The step, she said. Sorry? Elena's step, Dorothy said. The wooden one. From the studio. I have it. She looked at her canvas bag. At the specific, organized contents of a life reduced to what mattered most. At the wooden step she'd been carrying for 18 months because it was the thing she hadn't been able to leave behind. I know, Elena said. I know you have it. How? Dorothy said. Because you said you still had it, Elena said, earlier, when I asked about it. Dorothy had said that. She'd said it without thinking. She'd been carrying it so long it had stopped feeling like a thing she chose to carry and had started feeling like a thing that was just there. Part of what she carried, part of how she moved. She hadn't told anyone she had it. She hadn't told anyone a lot of things. It can come with you, Elena said, into the hotel. Marcus wanted me to tell you that specifically. Dorothy looked at her, at the bride, at the woman who had been 7 years old and decided she was going to learn fur-elise whether it took her 2 weeks or 2 months and had learned it in 6 weeks, who had set down her bouquet on the morning of her wedding to sit on a step, who was sitting here still, 25 minutes before she was supposed to be inside, getting married. You should go, Dorothy said. You have a wedding. I have a few more minutes, Elena said. Elena, Dorothy said. Mrs. Williams, Elena said. Go get married, Dorothy said. She said it the way you said things you meant completely. Without softening, without the layers of social cushioning that most instructions carried. Go get married, she said again. I'll be here. Elena looked at her. At what I'll be here meant not just for this morning. Okay, she said. She stood. She picked up the bouquet. She looked at it. At the white flowers that didn't need to be anything other than what they were. She held it out. These are for you, she said. Dorothy looked at the flowers. Elena, I'll get another one, Elena said. There are flowers everywhere in there. I'll carry one of those. She paused. These were my mother's idea. They should go to someone who understands why. Dorothy looked at the bouquet, at the white flowers, at the specific simple beauty of something that didn't need to be more than it was. She took them. Elena looked at her. She looked at Carmen. Carmen stood. Thank you, Carmen said. For what? Dorothy said. For the 6 weeks, Carmen said. For not making her wait for something easier. Dorothy held the bouquet. She looked at Carmen. She did the work, Dorothy said. I just brought the step. She walked in 11 minutes late, not dramatically late, the specific, manageable late of someone who had needed more time than planned and had taken it and was now here. The music was already playing. The 300 guests had been sitting for 8 minutes with the specific patient energy of people who had been told something had caused a brief delay and had accepted this because what else do you do when you're sitting in a ballroom at a billionaire wedding and the bride is 11 minutes late? Marcus was at the altar. He'd been told she was coming. He was not worried. She'd gotten a different bouquet. Not from the florist, from the arrangements along the aisle. She'd walked backstage and looked at the flowers and found the simplest ones, and taken a small bunch, and Carmen had tied them with a ribbon from her own wrist. And that was what Elena carried. The photographer had documented all of it. He'd been following since the steps. She'd stopped noticing him. That was how you knew a photographer was good, when you stopped noticing them. She stood at the entrance to the ballroom, Carmen beside her. She looked at the aisle, at 300 people turning to look at her, at Marcus at the altar, at the man she was going to marry. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her, with the specific full attention of someone who had decided she was the most interesting thing in the room and had been acting on that decision for 4 years. She walked. He didn't ask about the bouquet. He noticed. She knew he noticed. She knew him well enough to know that very little escaped him, and that the bouquet in her hand was different from the one he'd seen in every photograph for the past 3 months of planning. He didn't ask. He looked at her. Hi, she said. That was all. The officiant said something. They both turned to face him. The ceremony began. She'd written her own vows. Not because it was expected. It wasn't, particularly. It was one of those things that some couples did and some didn't, and there was no judgment in either direction. She'd written them because she'd had things to say that the standard language didn't hold. She'd been working on them for 3 months. She'd rewritten them 4 times. She'd settled on something that was shorter than the previous versions and truer. When the officiant nodded at her, she looked at Marcus, at the man who had sent David to find out what was happening on the steps, at the man who had arranged a room without making it a thing, at the man who had asked about the wooden step. She thought about what she wanted to say. She said it. I've been thinking about what a promise is, she said. Not the ceremony version, the actual thing. What you're doing when you say, I will. I've been thinking about it for 3 months, and I think what you're doing is you're deciding in advance. You're deciding before you know all the circumstances that you're going to show up. Not because the circumstances will always be good, because the person is worth showing up for regardless. She looked at him. You show up for people, she said. I've watched you do it for 4 years. Not when it's easy. That's not interesting. Easy is easy. When it costs something. When it would be simpler to look away, to move on, to decide that a situation is someone else's to handle. She paused. You don't look away. She thought about the rice pudding, about the things he'd filed and retrieved and acted on without announcement, about David coming to tell him what was happening on the steps, about don't make it a thing. And what I want to promise you, she said, is that I'll do the same. I'll show up. Not perfectly, I don't know how to promise perfect, but I know how to promise present. She looked at him. I've been practicing it my whole life. I just didn't know I was practicing it for you. Marcus looked at her. She recognized the expression. The specific expression he made when something had landed in the place where things that mattered landed. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to say anything yet. It was still her turn. I love you, she said. I've loved you since the rice pudding, if I'm being specific. He smiled. The full one. The one she'd been collecting for 4 years. His vows were shorter. Not because he had less to say. She knew from 4 years of paying attention that he had a great deal to say, but that he said it in the specific economical way of someone who understood that the words worth saying were the ones that carried their weight without additional support. He looked at her. I've been paying attention to you for 4 years, he said, and what I've learned is this. You see things, not everything. Nobody sees everything, but the specific things that matter, the things that are easy to look past because looking at them costs something. You see those. You've always seen them. He paused. I want to spend my life seeing them with you, not looking, seeing. He looked at her directly. That's the whole thing. That's what I want to promise. She looked at him. At the whole thing. Okay, she said. It came out before she thought about it. The officiant looked at her. The guests laughed. The specific warm laugh of a room that had been watching two people be entirely themselves. Sorry, she said. I mean, yes. I accept that. That's the whole thing. Marcus was smiling. He was still smiling when they exchanged rings. He was still smiling when the officiant said, I now pronounce you. He was still smiling when she kissed him. The reception was in the ballroom adjacent. During the cocktail hour, the specific organized milling of 300 people with drinks and small plates moving through a space designed for exactly this. David found Marcus. She's in the room, David said. Dorothy. She went up about 40 minutes ago. Good, Marcus said. She took the flowers, David said. The bouquet Elena gave her. She had them put in water. Good, Marcus said. And the step, David said. Marcus looked at him. She has it with her, David said. In the room. Marcus nodded. He thought about a woman who had carried a wooden step through 18 months because it was the thing she hadn't been able to leave behind, who was now in a hotel room with the step and white flowers in water. Is she okay? He said. I don't know, David said. I think she's processing. Yeah, Marcus said. What do we do tomorrow? David said. Marcus looked at the reception. At 300 people. At Elena across the room talking to someone he didn't know. The way she talked to people, fully present, entirely focused. The way she was with everyone she talked to. He thought about what came after one night. He didn't have the full answer. He knew the beginning of it. Tomorrow, he said, we ask her what she needs. David looked at him. That's it? David said. That's the first thing, Marcus said. Everything after depends on what she says. Elena found a moment at 7. The speeches were done. The first dance was done. The dinner was mostly done. She slipped out of the reception with the specific, practiced invisibility of someone who had been moving through events her whole life and knew how to exit a room without creating a departure. She took the elevator to the 6th floor. She knocked on room 612. Then, who is it? Elena, she said. Another pause. The door opened. Dorothy was in the hotel robe. Her hair was damp. She'd showered. She looked, Elena thought, like a person. Not like the person on the step. Like a person who had been cold for a long time and had stood under hot water until she wasn't cold anymore. You should be at your reception, Dorothy said. I have a few minutes, Elena said. Dorothy looked at her. She stepped back. Elena came in. The room was quiet. The bouquet was in the water glass on the nightstand. White flowers against the dark wood of a hotel room at night. The wooden step was beside the bed. Not hidden, placed. Elena looked at the step. You kept it, she said. I couldn't leave it, Dorothy said. I know, Elena said. She looked at Dorothy. Tomorrow, she said. When Marcus and I are back from, we're not doing a honeymoon immediately, we're going next month. Tomorrow we'd like to talk to you. About what comes next. Dorothy looked at her. Elena, not to fix everything, Elena said. I know you have resources. I know you've been managing. I know you don't want charity, and we're not offering charity. She paused. We're offering a conversation about what you need and what's possible and what makes sense. She looked at Dorothy. That's all. A conversation. Dorothy looked at the flowers, at the step, at the hotel room she hadn't expected to be in, at the bride standing in her reception, dress at 7 in the evening because she'd found a few minutes. Okay, she said. Okay, Elena said. She turned to go. Elena, Dorothy said. She turned back. You still hum, Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. When you were walking toward me this morning, Dorothy said. Before I knew who you were humming something. Elena thought about it. For Elise, she said. Yes, Dorothy said. I didn't know I was doing it, Elena said. You never did, Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. At 67 years old, in a hotel robe with damp hair and white flowers in a water glass on the nightstand. At the woman who had brought a wooden step to every lesson, who had not redirected her to something easier. Good night, Miss Williams, she said. Good night, Elena, Dorothy said. She went back to her wedding. They talked on Sunday, not the morning after. Marcus and Elena had slept late, the specific earned exhaustion of two people who had gotten married the day before and had stayed at their own reception until 11 and had said goodbye to 300 people and had finally been alone in a hotel room that cost more per night than Dorothy's apartment, had cost per month, and had not thought about any of that until they were lying in the dark. And Elena had said, she was my piano teacher. I know, Marcus had said. I didn't recognize her at first, Elena had said. I recognized the scar on no. I recognized something in her face. Before I knew who she was. What did you recognize? Marcus had said. Elena had thought about it. The expression, she'd said. The one you practiced when you were small. And things happened that you didn't want to show. Marcus had been quiet. She'd been practicing it for 18 months, Elena had said. And you recognized it, he'd said. I've been practicing it since I was 9, she'd said. He'd taken her hand in the dark. Neither of them had said anything else. They'd slept. Sunday morning they'd ordered room service. Coffee and eggs and the specific, unhurried quiet of a morning with nowhere to be. At 10 Elena had called Dorothy's room. Are you up? She'd said. I've been up since 6, Dorothy had said. Do you want breakfast? Elena had said. A pause. I've already had the hotel breakfast, Dorothy had said. I went down at 7. Elena had smiled. Of course you did, she'd said. It was very good, Dorothy had said. Good, Elena had said. Come up when you're ready. We want to talk. Dorothy had come at 11. She'd knocked twice, the specific considered knock of someone who'd been raised with the understanding that how you knocked on a door said something about you. Marcus had answered. They'd looked at each other. The specific, first meeting quality of two people who'd been adjacent to the same story and were now in the same room. Miss Williams, Marcus had said. Mr. Webb. Dorothy, he'd said. She'd looked at him. Marcus, she'd said. He'd stepped back. She'd come in. They'd sat at the table by the window. The three of them. Coffee. The remains of room service. November Atlanta outside the window doing what November Atlanta did. Elena had let Marcus lead, not because she didn't have things to say, because she understood that Dorothy didn't know Marcus yet, and that the conversation they needed to have required Dorothy to know who she was talking to, and that the best way for Dorothy to know who Marcus was to watch him be himself. She'd watched. I want a situation, Marcus had said. Not to fix it before I understand it. To understand it first. Dorothy had looked at him. What do you want to know? She'd said. Whatever you want to tell me, he'd said. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know what the last 18 months have been. I don't. I've never been in that situation. I'm not going to act like I have a framework for it that's more useful than your own experience of it. Dorothy had looked at him for a long moment. She'd made the calculation Elena had seen her make on the steps, the quick, accurate assessment of whether someone was worth trusting with true things. The calculation had produced, yes, she'd talked. She'd told them the full version, not the shape she'd given Elena on the steps, the full thing. Jefferson Elementary, the letter, the 8 months, the apartment. She'd told them about the shelter system, the specific, unglamorous reality of navigating it, the rules, the availability, the specific, grinding indignity of needing to prove your need to receive help designed for your need. She'd told them about the job applications, 47 in 18 months. She'd told them about the interviews, 12. She'd told them about the ones that had come close, 2 positions at private music schools that had ultimately gone to younger candidates. She hadn't said younger with bitterness. She'd said it the way she said facts that were simply true. Marcus had listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions before she finished. He didn't take notes. He just listened with the specific, concentrated attention of someone who understood that this was information he needed to have completely before he could be useful about any of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "The 47 applications," he said. "What were you applying for?" "Music teaching positions," she said. "Primarily." "Primarily," he said. "I applied for some administrative positions as well," she said, "at schools, community centers, and the skill set you have," he said to them. "Beyond music." She looked at him. "Organizations," she said. 35 years of managing a studio, recital programs, parent communications, scheduling, curriculum development. She paused. "I understand children, how they learn, what they need, what gets in the way of what they need." Marcus looked at her. "That's not a narrow skill set," he said. "No," she said. "But it doesn't fit neatly on a resume in a way that hiring systems recognize." "I know," he said. "Hiring systems are bad at recognizing things that don't fit neatly." "Yes," she said. "That's something I can do something about," he said. Dorothy looked at him. "Not your situation specifically," he said. "Though, yes, also your situation specifically. I mean, systemically. The way hiring filters work, the way experience is weighted, the way people who've done extraordinary work in fields that don't translate neatly get screened out before anyone looks at them." He paused. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Before yesterday. It's something my company has been working on in our own hiring and that we've been talking about doing something larger with." Dorothy looked at him. "But that's a different conversation," he said. "The immediate question is you." "I don't want charity," she said. "I know," he said. "Alina told me. I'm not offering charity." "Then what are you offering?" she said. He looked at her. "A job," he said, "if you want it. My company runs a youth education program. We started it 3 years ago. It's grown more than we expected, and we need someone who understands how children learn and what gets in the way of what they need." He paused. "That's what you said you have. I believe you." Dorothy was very still. "You don't know me," she said. "I know you brought a wooden step to every lesson for a year," he said, "so a 7-year-old could reach the pedals. And I know you didn't redirect her when she decided she was going to learn something hard. And I know you've been carrying that step for 18 months because it's the thing you couldn't leave behind." He looked at her. "I think I know enough." Dorothy looked at the window, at Atlanta, at the specific ordinary morning of a city that didn't know what was happening in this room. "I'd need to see a job description," she said. "Of course," Marcus said. "And I'd need to understand the scope," she said. "The program, what it does, who it serves." "Of course," Marcus said. "And I'm not accepting anything because of yesterday," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm considering it because it sounds like work I could do well, not because of the steps." Marcus looked at her. "I understand," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm not offering it because of yesterday either. Yesterday told me you existed. The rest of this conversation is why I'm offering." Dorothy looked at him. The calculation again. The quick, accurate assessment. "All right," she said. She said it the way she said things she meant, plainly, without decoration, the way she'd been saying things her whole life. "All right," she said again, like it was decided. Because it was. Elena had been quiet through most of it. She spoke at the end. "The apartment," she said, "while you're figuring out the job. We have a place. It's not ours. It's a property Marcus owns. One of the units is empty. It's not charity. It would be a rental at fair market rate. We're not giving you anything." Dorothy looked at her. "Why tell me that?" Dorothy said. "Because you need to know it's not charity," Elena said. "And because I know you know the difference and that the difference matters to you." Dorothy looked at her, at the woman who had been 7 years old and had needed a step to reach the pedals, who was now 32 and sitting across a hotel room table in post-wedding quiet, making sure the difference was clear. Yes, Dorothy said. It does. Good, Elena said. She looked at Marcus. He looked at her, the specific private look of two people who had been paying attention to each other for 4 years and could say things in a look that would take longer to say out loud. Thank you, Dorothy said. She said it to both of them, not as an expression of gratitude that closed something, as an acknowledgement of something that was beginning. She started on a Monday. Not immediately. There had been paperwork, the specific institutional sequence of becoming an employee that required forms and background checks, and the particular, slightly absurd process of a system verifying that you were who you said you were, which Dorothy had navigated with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been navigating systems for 18 months and had gotten very good at it. 3 weeks. 3 weeks between the hotel steps and the first Monday. She'd been in the apartment for two of them. The apartment was on the fourth floor. Not the same building as the one on Peachtree, a different neighborhood, a different configuration, but fourth floor. The window faced east. The light in the morning came through at an angle that did something specific with the hour after sunrise. She'd stood at the window the first morning. She'd looked at the light. She'd thought, there it is. Not the light specifically, the recognition, the specific physical understanding that she was somewhere she could stay, not forever. She understood the terms, fair market rent, month to month until something more permanent was arranged. She wasn't naive about what it was. But for now it was a window and east-facing light, and a radiator that didn't make any sound at all, which was different from the one on Peachtree, but which she was willing to accept. She'd put the wooden step by the window, not in a closet, by the window, where the light hit it in the morning. She'd called the first morning, not Elena, Marcus. She'd thought about why she'd called Marcus specifically and had decided it was because she wanted him to know separately from Elena. She wanted him to know that she understood what he'd done and that she wasn't going to conflate it with what Elena had done because they were different things, and both of them deserved to be acknowledged as different things. He'd answered on the second ring. Ms. Williams, he'd said. Dorothy, she'd said. A pause. Dorothy, he'd said. I'm in the apartment, she'd said. I wanted you to know. Good, he'd said. The light is good, she'd said. East-facing, she'd said. A pause. Marcus, she'd said. Yes, he'd said. What you did, she'd said. The room at the hotel. The job. The apartment. I want you to know that I know you didn't do it because of the steps. He was quiet. I did it because of the steps, he said. In the sense that the steps were how I knew you existed. But not. I know, she said. That's what I mean. The steps were the introduction. What came after was something else. Yes, he said. I wanted you to know I understand that, she said. Because it matters. The reason something is done matters as much as the thing. He was quiet for a moment. That's true, he said. I've been a teacher for 35 years, she said. I understand motivation. She thought she heard him smile. Yes, he said. I imagine you do. Good morning, Marcus, she said. Good morning, Dorothy, he said. She hung up. She looked at the light. She made tea. The program was called Meridian Youth, not Marcus's name. The company was Web Technologies. The program had been named by the team that ran it. The specific, well-intentioned naming of something that wanted to be about the participants rather than the founders. She'd read everything before her first day. All of it. The program documentation, the curriculum frameworks, the assessment rubrics, the participant outcome data from the 3 years it had been running. She'd made notes. 12 pages. Not because she'd been asked to, because she couldn't read something without understanding it completely. And she couldn't understand it completely without writing what she found. She'd brought the notes on her first day. Her manager, a woman named Patricia, 38, the specific, organized warmth of someone who cared about the work and knew how to create conditions for other people to do it, had looked at the 12 pages. You read everything, Patricia had said. I read things, Dorothy had said. 12 pages, Patricia had said. I had observations, Dorothy had said. Patricia had looked at her. Tell me, she'd said. And Dorothy had. She'd been doing it for 4 weeks when Elena visited. Not a formal visit, Elena had texted, I'm near your office, can I come by? Dorothy had said, yes. Elena had come at 2:15. The program ran out of a converted warehouse space in Midtown. Not corporate. The specific, intentional warmth of somewhere that understood its participants were children and had designed accordingly. Color. Light. The kind of furniture that invited you to stay. Dorothy had been in the middle of something when Elena arrived. Not a lesson. She hadn't started formal sessions yet. She was still in the observation and planning phase, learning the existing program before she modified it. She'd been sitting with a boy named James, 9 years old. He'd been struggling with something, not music, a math concept he'd been assigned at school that he was supposed to practice at home and that he'd brought to the program because he didn't have anywhere else to bring it. Dorothy had sat with him. For 40 minutes, not teaching, sitting. The specific, patient presence of someone who understood that sometimes what a child needed before they could learn the thing was to feel that the thing was learnable. She'd brought the wooden step. Not for James specifically. She'd brought it because it lived in her bag now, the way it had lived in her bag for 19 years at Jefferson Elementary. The specific, automatic packing of something that was part of the equipment. James had looked at it. What's that for? He'd said. For reaching things, she'd said. What things? He'd said. Whatever needs reaching, she'd said. He'd looked at it. He'd looked at his math. Can I stand on it? If it helps, she'd said. He'd stood on it. He hadn't needed it to do math. He'd stood on it anyway. And something in his posture had changed. The specific physical change that happened when a person felt slightly elevated. Not literally, the other way, the way you stood differently when something under you said, you're supposed to be able to reach this. He'd looked at the math. He'd worked through it. Dorothy had watched. Elena had arrived in the middle of this. She'd stood in the doorway. She'd not interrupted. She'd watched. When James finished and Dorothy sent him back to the main room, Elena had come in. She'd looked at the step. You're using it, she said. Of course, Dorothy said. For math, Elena said. For whatever needs reaching, Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. He didn't need it to reach anything, Elena said. No, Dorothy said. He needed it to believe he could. Elena looked at the step, at the wooden step that had traveled from Jefferson Elementary through 18 months and into this room, that had sat by a window in an east-facing apartment, that had now helped a 9-year-old believe he could reach something he'd decided was unreachable. Ms. Williams, she said. Dorothy, Dorothy said. Elena looked at her. Dorothy, she said, I have something for you. She reached into her bag. She took out an envelope. She put it on the table between them. Dorothy looked at it. What is this? She said. Open it, Elena said. Dorothy opened it. Inside was a photograph, not new, old, slightly faded at the edges, the specific quality of something printed a long time ago. A child at a piano, 7 years old. Small, the child was small even for 7, the specific smallness that had required a step. The child was not looking at the camera. The child was looking at the keys, with the specific, concentrated expression of someone who had decided something. Below the piano, barely visible, cut off at the edge of the frame, a wooden step. Dorothy looked at the photograph. Where did you get this? She said. My mother, Elena said. She found it last week. She'd been looking since the wedding. She thought she had it somewhere. Dorothy held the photograph. At the child at the piano. At the step. At 30 years ago in a room she still carried in a photograph. I didn't know she took it, Dorothy said. She didn't tell you, Elena said. She didn't want you to stop what you were doing. Dorothy looked at the child at the piano, at the concentration. At whoever 7-year-old Elena had been before she became the woman who sat down on hotel steps. She looks like you, Dorothy said. She is me, Elena said. I know, Dorothy said. I mean, she looks like who you still are. Elena looked at the photograph. The concentration, Elena said. Yes, Dorothy said. You look at things the same way now. Elena looked at her. You look at people, Dorothy said. The way you looked at the keys. like you've decided. Elena was quiet. Keep it, Elena said. The photograph. Dorothy looked at her. I have the original, Elena said. Mom made a copy for you. Dorothy held the photograph. She thought about the studio photograph in her bag. The one she'd taken on her last day at Jefferson. The empty room, the light. She thought about what it meant to have photographs of rooms, of the spaces where things had happened, where people had reached things they hadn't been able to reach before. She thought about what it meant that the most important room in that photograph wasn't empty. It had a child in it, looking at the keys, like she'd decided. Thank you, Dorothy said. Not to close something, to mark something. Thank you, Elena, she said. Elena stood. She looked at the wooden step. She looked at Dorothy. Good, she said. She walked out. 6 months later, Dorothy had a recital. Not Jefferson Elementary. Meridian Youth. 12 children. Ages 7 to 13. The program had added music 3 months in, not because it was planned, because Dorothy had written a proposal, and Patricia had read it and brought it to Marcus, and Marcus had said yes before Patricia finished the sentence. The recital was on a Saturday afternoon. The warehouse space had been rearranged. Chairs in rows, a small keyboard at the front, the specific organized anticipation of a room waiting for something to begin. Elena and Marcus sat in the third row. Carmen sat beside Elena. Patricia sat at the end. James was third. He played something simple, a beginner piece, the kind that didn't require a wooden step to reach the keys, because James was 9 and tall for 9 and could reach them fine. He played it carefully. He made 2 mistakes. He kept going. When he finished, he looked at Dorothy. Dorothy nodded. That was all. He sat down. The last child was 7 years old. Small. The specific smallness of someone who had not yet grown into the space they were going to occupy. She sat at the keyboard. She looked at the keys. Dorothy placed the wooden step beneath her feet. The girl's posture changed. She played. Not perfectly. Completely. The way you played something when you decided you were going to play it, and the deciding was the whole thing. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Carmen started clapping. Everyone followed. Elena looked at Dorothy. Dorothy was not looking at the room. She was looking at the step, at the specific worn wood of something that had been useful for a very long time. That was still useful. That was going to keep being useful. Subscribe if you're new. Share this tonight with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, who brought the step for you? I read everyone. See you in the next story.